Good morning. This is Kelly Hall with the Longview Chamber. We will begin our webinar in just a couple of minutes. We have people calling in rapidly. We will be back with you in just a moment. Thank you. Good morning. This is Kelly Hall, President and CEO of the Longview Chamber of Commerce. On behalf of the Longview and Tyler Chamber, as well as numerous chambers from across the region, we appreciate you joining us this morning. I'd like to begin with a few housekeeping items. First, this webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the Longview Chamber's website at www.longviewchamber.com. For those on the line, you will receive an email later today with a link to listen to again. And I'd also like for you to consider sharing this with peers and other businesses across East Texas. Next, there are a couple of features I would like to make you aware of. Please find the chat and question icons. You can type in both features to the organizer. The purpose of chat today is to make the organizer aware there are issues with the broadcast. The question feature is for you to ask questions of the presenters throughout the presentation. Presenters will be answering questions when they are finished. So for example, Senator Cornyn will answer a few questions if he has time after his presentation, and then we'll let Sara speak and she'll answer her questions. It's important for me to share with you that my team and I are thinking of you during this difficult time. I recognize this is a painful season and our business community is looking for answers. We are in uncharted waters, and while we don't have all the answers, we do have access to experts in specific areas that can provide you with a place to start. Today, as I mentioned, we are featuring our U.S. Senator John Cornyn and Sara Armstrong with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. At this time, Senator, I would like to turn the program over to you.
Well, thank you, Kelly, for giving me the opportunity. I appreciate the Longview and Tyler Chambers co-hosting this call so we can provide your constituents and my constituents the information they need to know how to deal with this double-barrel crisis. One, of course, is a public health crisis, and the other is a threat to our small businesses and our jobs. Something we've been very proud of and continue to be proud of in Texas and across the nation until this virus came along and changed everything. I'm glad to join Sara with the U.S. Chamber, and who will, I know, have some more detail about what I'm going to cover. What I'd like to try to do is give you a perspective from Congress and from Washington as we try to respond appropriately to this emergency. As you know, right now the virus is spread across all 50 states and with incredible strength. And we all know that we've got personal responsibilities. In other words, maintaining social distancing, following the orders of our leaders at the cities, counties, and state and national level with regard to congregating. Fact is, this virus loves a crowd, and that's why it's so important for us not only to maintain that social distancing, but also the good individual hygiene. So the rest of the bill, Congress focuses on what Congress is intended to do in terms of rescuing people who, through no fault of their own, find themselves out of work or their business threatened. But we'll have to start where we always do in a public health crisis, with our hospitals and our healthcare providers. When I talked to Governor Abbott initially about this, he said the two things we need the most are more testing, and we need more personal protective equipment for healthcare providers when they conduct those tests or when they deal with people who have symptoms and have positive outcomes. And there's been a huge surge of testing, and that's one reason you see more people with confirmed cases. But the good news is, once people are testing positive, they can be isolated either at home or, if necessary, hospitalized and get the appropriate care. But we appropriated $100 billion for hospitals crushed by the weight of this virus. Part of this was because they were delaying or deferring elective surgery, which happens to be, in many cases, the difference between making ends meet and not making ends meet. So we needed to help there, plus to prepare them with the equipment and the personnel and the resources necessary, things like masks, gloves, and other equipment that are necessary. So we know this has been difficult on everybody. For parents with school-age kids, schools are closed, and travel plans are canceled. People are losing their jobs and paychecks, and of course, we're all just hunkering down. So the first thing that I thought should be our priority in Congress is getting money to people who, through no fault of their own, aren't receiving a paycheck. And indeed, part of this bill will make sure that a family of 4 in East Texas with a household income of $150,000 or less will get up to $3,400. That will be the immediate financial lifeline, because, of course, with no money coming in, but the bill's still coming to pay mortgage, rent, food, and the like, we wanted to make sure we got that money out as soon as possible. So Secretary Mnuchin said his goal was to get that in 2 weeks or no more than 3 weeks. And of course, now it's been a week since the bill was signed by the president. So I'm hopeful that in no longer than 2 weeks, people will begin to see that money in their bank account direct deposited via the IRS. So we know that businesses like your members here, Kelly, are wondering how you're going to survive. Again, if you've been shut down or your operations have changed dramatically, your costs haven't gone away. And for most of us, it's not feasible for us to go without reliable income. So the main program for small businesses is a $350 billion Paycheck Protection Program. This is available through SBA, Small Business Administration certified lenders. And the goal is to provide 8 weeks of cash flow assistance to small businesses. And these low interest loans can be used to cover everything from payroll to chain disruptions to rent. And here's the deal. If employers maintain their payroll until June, then payroll, rent, and utility payments covered by the loan can be completely forgiven. Now, I'm not sure that's going to be feasible for everybody, but if an employer can maintain their payroll using this loan, this forgivable loan, then it will be completely forgiven. So, as you know, today is the first day you can begin to apply for those loans. But I know there's already, in listening to Sara and Kelly before you all came on, I know there's already significant confusion. And as you might imagine, in trying to move this fast, a country of 330 million people, there are going to be some glitches and some unintended consequences. But we're going to work through that together. My advice, for what it's worth, and I'd be interested in what Sara recommends, but is to contact the bank and credit union with whom you have a business relationship already. They, of course, are looking for guidance themselves, but I think together, between you and them and the rest of us pulling together, we can make this thing work. I heard some banks will need a little more time and a little more guidance, but with a completely new system, there's a learning curve for all of us. So if you haven't done so already, I'd encourage you to review the application and start compiling your business data soon. My website, cornyn.senate.gov, the SBA website, and the U.S. Treasury website have guidance for lenders and borrowers. And you can always reach out to your local Small Business Development Center for technical assistance. I know this is a tough time for everybody, but I've also seen the best of Texas and the best of our country when we are presented with a challenge, whether it's 9/11, the terrorist attacks that killed more than 3,000 Americans, whether it was the Great Recession and the Wall Street meltdown of 2008, or whether it's this coronavirus and our public health and economic response to it. These are times that test us all, but I'm confident that working together, we will come out well on the other side. We need to take care of our neighbors and our family members, the people who are especially vulnerable, which are elderly folks and people with underlying health conditions. For most of us, we're going to be at low risk as long as we observe the doctor's orders about social distancing and good hygiene. But this is going to be difficult, more difficult for some than others. But our goal is, once we defeat the virus, to make sure that we have our economy ready to snap back, which means providing this assistance to our small businesses. Many of you know Kathy Comer in my Tyler office, and I encourage you to reach out to her if we can help. Again, I want to thank all of you at the Longview and Tyler Chamber for organizing the call. Thanks for the invitation to join you. And so with that, I'll be happy to answer or dodge a couple questions, Kelly.
Great. The first question is, Congress has passed 3 coronavirus relief laws to stop the spread of COVID-19 and help businesses stay afloat. But we know no bill is perfect. What would you like to see in the next coronavirus relief package?
Well, I know there's been some discussion about things like an infrastructure bill, and I'm certainly not opposed to that. I do think there are things that are probably more urgent for us to do. As you point out, this is a massive piece of legislation. If you'd told me that I would end up voting for $2.2 trillion in spending in a single bill, and that a vote would be unanimous in the Senate, I would not have believed you. But we did, because this was necessary. And so one of my priorities are to make sure that the way that this thing is implemented as smoothly as possible and gets the relief to the individuals and to the businesses as Congress intended as quickly as possible. And then I'm sure there are going to be some gaps that we're going to need to fill as well. So that's going to be my priority. But if people want to talk about infrastructure packages, that's something we should have done already. And I'm certainly happy to weigh in on and to support. But right now, I think making sure we respond to the public health and financial crisis presented by the coronavirus is job number one.
Excellent. I know the Treasury Department and the Federal Reserve have been working night and day to get rules ready. There still seems to be some delay in that. Do you have any idea when they will be ready to disseminate the rest of the information within the emergency relief bill?
Well, as you can imagine, Secretary Mnuchin and the folks that are responsible for implementing this have been working 24/7 to get it done. I think I heard you say earlier that some of the rules for this direct loan program to small businesses, there was some additional information released at 4 a.m. this morning. That gives you an idea of what people are doing. So I would assume that there's going to continue to be a flow of information and guidance. We've gotten people raising questions about maybe a misinterpretation. I just think we're going to have to take this one day at a time, one step at a time, and work our way through all these problems. But I think we'll get there, maybe not quite as quickly as we'd hoped, but if we all hang in there together and work cooperatively, I'm sure we'll be able to get it done.
Agreed. Patience.
Patience is hard to come by.
Yes. So there's a lot of questions around developing the vaccine. And a great example of that is Texas Children's Hospital in Houston testified before Congress on March 12th. Their team is close to developing a vaccine. What is the process? And will they be testing on humans? How will the administration help facilitate getting vaccines mobilized so it doesn't take a year or longer?
Well, as you can imagine, Kelly, I know we've all tried to get up to speed on these pandemics and what are the historical precedents. I just got through reading a book about the 1918 Great Influenza pandemic that killed tens of millions of people around the world. And but the basic response appears to be about the same. And that is, first you have to identify the virus or pathogen, and then you can begin to look at clinical trials to come up with a cure, and that's going. And then ultimately a vaccine is going to be required. And many of us do the seasonal flu vaccine, but because these viruses have a tendency to mutate, many times even the seasonal flu vaccine misses the target and people still get the flu. But Department of Health and Human Services has partnered with several developers to expedite the development and manufacturing of vaccine. The Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority within HHS has begun to support non-clinical studies and phase 1 clinical trials. So this is the same vaccine platform that was used during the Ebola outbreak. To develop a vaccine for COVID-19, the FDA has begun to use every tool at its disposal, and this program is aptly called the Coronavirus Treatment Acceleration Program. So doing what we know we need to do on an individual basis to stay healthy and stop the spread of this virus, to bend the curve, good hygiene, social distancing, and the like, listening to the direction from our local, state, and federal leaders on best practices, together with our world-class researchers and scientists coming up with effective cures which will mitigate the harm, together with an eventual vaccine. The vaccine probably will be the last thing to happen. I've seen different projections, but it may not be available until as early as next September. But in the meantime, if we bend the curve, the virus will subside, along with good practices on our part, maybe some recognized drug therapies that will help mitigate the problem in people who are especially hard hit. That seems to be the formula for beating this sort of epidemic.
Wow. So in the last few weeks, we've been hearing a lot of new terms from elected officials on how we social distance. Recently, I had someone ask me to please be sure and correctly use the terminology for our county, which is we have stay-at-home orders. But I made a mistake one time of using the term stay in place, and I did not realize the difference at that time between stay in place and stay at home orders. Could you please share with us the difference?
Well, I'm not sure I can parse the difference between those, but I think the point is the same, and that is non-essential interaction with people needs to be kept at a minimum. Obviously, we got to go to the grocery store, or maybe there's delivery service, maybe not. And while you're out and about performing that essential function, you need to maintain the distance and to obviously use sanitizer on your hands, because you can get it from contact on inanimate objects and the like. But I think the goal is for people to stay home if they can, as much as possible, and avoid crowds. And because that's the way the virus spreads. It can't leap tall buildings in single bounds, but it can jump if you're too close to somebody and you have an unguarded cough, or perhaps come in contact with a stair rail or a door handle or a button in an elevator that's been touched by somebody with the virus. So I would just stay tuned, pay attention to folks there at the city and the county level, and also to what you hear coming out of Governor Abbott's office, together with the best practices recommended by the Center for Disease Control and the Texas Department of Health Services.
Excellent. Do you have time for one more question?
Yes, ma'am.
A lot of our members have questions regarding the technical requirements tied to SBA loans, and specifically the technical requirements tied to the loan forgiveness program, which you briefly talked about. what is the best way for each business to figure out the specifics in relation to their individual situation?
Well, I think, Kelly, this is a little confusing because this is not part of the traditional SBA program. This was something we created outside of the SBA to try to get the money to the lenders as fast as possible, but we required that they be SBA certified lenders. So this is a new process, and I think it's going to vary depending on the needs of each individual small business. So that's why I would encourage you to contact your bank, your credit union, the people you do business with on a daily or frequent basis, and they will know and you will know what your individual circumstances are and how this may best be tailored to meet those needs. When the federal government acts, it acts like a shotgun effect, not a rifle, and I think it's going to be necessary to tailor some of these programs for the specific needs of these small businesses. But the bottom line is, if you qualify for this, then you're going to get and you keep your employees on the payroll for the next 2 months, then you're going to get up to 250% of your operating costs up over the next 2 months as an incentive for you to keep your employees on payroll. Now, if you've already let people go, you can rehire them and still qualify for this program. So this is a powerful incentive, and it may not work all the time, but it will work, I'm confident, in some cases, hopefully most cases, where employers can keep afloat and maintain their relationship with their employees and then be up and raring to go once this health crisis passes.
Senator, we sure do appreciate you spending the last 20 minutes with us. Do you have any closing remarks that you would like to make? I know you have another webinar to get to.
Yeah, one webinar after another, one Zoom and Skype. It's a new world. I just want to say thank you for letting me join you. I know there's a lot of apprehension, just a lot of anxiety associated with the unknown. But every time I've seen something happen that is unexpected like this, that puts a lot of apprehension in our hearts and our minds, we eventually figure it out. But we always do that by working together, and we'll get through this just like we have every other previous challenge. But we're just going to have to try to work as closely together as we can and help each other out.
Well, we appreciate you, Senator, and everything you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good to be with you. Have a great day.
You too. At this time, we would like to turn the presentation over to Sara Armstrong, who is with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Sara is the Vice President of Political Affairs. And just a little bit about Sara. She joined the U.S. Chamber team a few years ago, and I had the opportunity to go to Israel with Sara. We met each other on that trip, and since then she has become a valuable resource, colleague, and friend. So Sara, thank you for being with us today, and the program is yours.
Hey, Kelly, this is Sara Armstrong. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm really delighted to be here and honored to be here with you and the Senator. First things first, can you see my screen okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, fantastic. Well, great. Well, Kelly, again, thank you for having me. Kelly is a good friend of the U.S. Chamber, and we're really good partners with her. I know she does a great job for you in the Longview community. I'm a Texas native myself, and so I have a special appreciation for the Texas Chambers, and especially to Kelly and the Longview Chamber team. So let me begin by saying that we understand what a challenging time this is all going on for all of you. We're in unprecedented times. Our lawmakers have never faced this before. Our healthcare system has never dealt with anything at this magnitude. And many other companies are under a lot of pressure to keep their doors open to provide essential services in the wake of this crisis. So we're thinking about you, your families, your colleagues, and hope everybody's staying safe and taking care of themselves. So what I'm going to do this morning is basically explain some of the provisions of the CARES Act, Bear in mind, I'm not a loan officer or a lawyer or an accountant or a tax advisor, so please remember that keeping those important professionals in your toolbox is going to be hugely important now more than ever to help you determine basically the best path forward for you and your organization. So let me start right off at the top. I'm going to give you an idea of the scale of this. I know the Senator talked a little bit about the CARES Act, but essentially what this is it's a $2 trillion package. It's just under about 10% of the regular GDP of our country. And this package is designed to be a robust program because the idea is that we want this to be a bridge that helps avoid a prolonged recession and a downturn. And this allows, once we get back into regular commerce, that we can really begin resuming back to normal when that point in time is determined by CDC and other health officials. In addition to the $2 trillion in the face value of the package, because some of the funds can be used by the Federal Reserve, it can basically be leveraged to provide an additional $4 trillion in support for the economy. We'll talk a little bit about the individual provisions. Perhaps the most important are the automatic payments that the federal government is making to individual taxpayers. They will begin the process of direct depositing these funds to taxpayers across the country. The amount is $1,200 per individual, $2,400 for joint returns, plus $500 per child. And that begins to phase out, though, for incomes over $75,000 for individuals or joint income of $150,000. Just yesterday, though, we learned that about 6.6 million Americans applied for unemployment just last week, and that was more than double of what it was the week before. We anticipate this will continue to rise. And so the CARES Act also includes some fairly robust expansions of unemployment benefits. And to highlight, most restrictions on eligibility for unemployment has been suspended as long as the unemployment is due to COVID-19. In addition, the federal government is providing another $600 on top of the regular state benefit through July 31st. So states simply have to agree to accept this additional benefit for their residents. And a lot of questions have come up about whether or not individuals will remain on unemployment, particularly given the enhanced benefit. So it's important to remember that eligibility ends when an individual can return to work. So if an employer is reopening and calling employees back and that employee is available to work and they choose not to work, then their individual eligibility ends. So how do you access this? This still goes through your state unemployment office. So you don't go to the federal government, you go to your state unemployment office for those unemployment benefits. So let's talk a little bit about major provisions for employers. We've really broken them down into three groups: the provisions that are available to all employers, the provisions available to larger employers, and then small business, the self-employed, independent contractors, and nonprofits. I'll spend most of my time on those last categories today. All employers are going to see some tax changes and the employee retention tax credit, which I'll talk about. Larger employers will see loans and loan guarantees. And then the small business, self-employed, independent contractors, and nonprofits will see eligibility for the Paycheck Protection Program, or known as PPP. And then also the other opportunity is the SBA's Economic Injury Disaster Loan, also known as EIDL loan. So let me start with the provisions that are available for all employers. So all employers basically have the CARES Act provision for employers, those that actually have employees where they pay a payroll tax. So think about it this way: everyone who writes a check to their employees, after you write that check, you normally write another check to the federal government covering the payroll taxes for both the employee and the employer side. Under this bill, an employer may choose to delay their payment of their portion of payroll taxes, which is 6.2% of Social Security wages. I know that's a little confusing, but essentially you can delay paying that between now and January 1st of 2021. If you choose to delay, you have to pay 50% of the accumulated amounts that you would have owed by December 31st, 2021, and the remaining 50% on December 31st, 2022. So essentially, if you delay, you have 2 years to pay this back over 2 annual installments, both in 2021 and 2022. There's an important caveat here. This generally is available to all employers except if you have a loan forgiven under the Paycheck Protection Program, PPP. This is a small business loan program that I'll talk a little bit about later, but basically you can't double dip. So again, these are going to be questions you need to ask your loan officers and other officials that you're working with to make sure you're choosing the right program here. Other tax changes that are important: net operating losses. If you have a business who has an operating loss and you want to be able to use that against prior taxes paid. Now those operating losses are expanded from 2018, 2019, and 2020, and generally can be carried back 5 years. This also applies to pass-throughs and sole proprietors. If you're a business, this is primarily for corporations that have AMT credits. You can accelerate the recovery of those. You also have the opportunity to increase your interest deductibility for 2019 and 2020, and importantly for restaurants and retail establishments who in the past couple of years have made investments in their property, they can accelerate the recovery of that as well. All of these provisions are really centered on one idea. Basically, it's to improve liquidity for employers. At the moment when employers have no revenue coming in, it's really going to be hard to pay the bills, and so these provisions are trying to give employers greater access to liquidity. It's not so much about reducing overall taxes as it is timing, so giving employers more access to the cash that they have today to be able to pay their employees. Also available to all employers is the employee retention credit. Now, this is a little bit of a late addition to the bill. The early draft did not include this provision. So as a result, there hasn't been a lot of attention paid to it. The retention credit generally applies to the employers who have employees, and we're talking about businesses, but also nonprofits, for example, who are fully or partially shut down as a result of the virus. Or they have a 50% drop in their gross receipts in a quarter, and they're eligible for this until their gross receipts get back up to 80%. So think about it this way. This is designed to help employers who shut down or lost revenue, but who continue to pay their employees. So how much is this worth? It's 50% of the wages paid by the employer, up to $10,000 per employee. And that's a fully refundable tax credit. So think about it as basically a $5,000 tax credit available to the employer. There are special rules for employers with more than 100 employees and employers with less than 100 employees. If you have more than 100 employees, the benefit only applies to employees who you are paying but who are not providing services. So basically think about it this way. Your business is shut down. You've had this drop in revenue. Your employees not working. They're not teleworking, but you continue to pay them. You can access this credit as a benefit in recognition of the fact that you kept paying them during this time. Now, if you have 100 or fewer employees, the requirement that they not be providing services doesn't apply. It's available to all the employees you pay during the eligible period. The eligible period being when you're shut down or when you have a quarter with this drop in gross receipts relative to the prior year. So importantly, again, here, the Paycheck Protection Program, this is that small business loan program. If you receive one of those loans, because it can be converted into a grant, you can't take advantage of the employee retention credit. Again, this is considered double dipping. We understand that employers may have cash flow problems. And so one of the things for employers who take advantage of this is we expect Treasury will be providing guidance that will allow employers to get an advance in the payment of the credit, which will help them pay their employees today. So I'm going to turn over to mid-size and larger employers. Basically, the bill includes about $500 billion from the Treasury Department to support loans, loan guarantees, and the Federal Reserve credit facilities. The Federal Reserve credit facilities, you may have read about them in the paper. These are the things the Federal Reserve is creating, for example, to support commercial paper, money market funds. They do these as a regular course of business when we have a financial crisis. They were used robustly, for example, in 2008. 454 of that 500 billion is directly for businesses at large. There's also 46 billion that are special programs for the airline industry and critical national security businesses. So we expect in the coming days, we'll see the Federal Reserve issue more guidance about these credit facilities, get them launched, and those terms and conditions will be applied as well. This is not going to be a situation where the company goes directly to the Treasury Department or the Federal Reserve. Instead, the Federal Reserve is doing this to support financial institutions in the United States to help them make loans available. There are some restrictions to go along with this in exchange for accepting the benefit that could include stock buybacks by the company, so long as their loans are pending, and for an additional year and limits on increasing executive compensation. So those are a couple of issues with the mid and larger employers. Where I really want to spend some time is on the small businesses, the self-employed, independent contractors, and nonprofits. That's where I'm going to spend most of my time today. The provision that's getting the most attention is called the Paycheck Protection Program, again, PPP. It's that $349 billion in loans you've been hearing about for small businesses that's generally defined as employers with less than 500 employees. The 501c3s are eligible for it, self-employed, sole proprietors, and independent contractors. Now, groups that are left out of it, 501c6s, for example, our very own chambers like the Longview Chamber, we are going to be lobbying for the fourth phase of that legislation to hopefully include some of these 501 groups that are not currently included in this Paycheck Protection Program, because we understand it's a critical part of their recovery efforts as well. A way to think about it is this: if your business is generally qualifying for an SBA program, you're going to qualify under this program as well. And in addition to that, some employers or some businesses who would not qualify have been added to the list. So that includes, for example, independent contractors and the self-employed. So they're now eligible for these loans. It also includes restaurants and hotels who would otherwise be ineligible, because if you add up all their locations, they have more than 500 employees. So under this bill, it says we're going to evaluate you in the hotel or food service industries based on a per location basis. So you don't automatically assume that you're ineligible because of previous rules around it. So how much can you borrow? You can borrow up to 2.5 months of your average payroll expenses. There's a formula to calculate this, where you first take your average monthly payroll, and once that's calculated, you simply multiply that by 2.5, basically the 2.5 months, except the loan can't exceed $10 million. So that's where the cap is $10 million. Where do you get these loans? A lot of people are asking about that. These are not through the SBA. Instead, you're going to go to your local and national lenders. And as the senator was saying, announced just this morning about 4 a.m., the Treasury issued guidance to our national and community and small local lenders about how this program is going to work. So today was the first day that lenders were going to be available, and for small businesses. Independent contractors and the self-employed can start applying on April 10th. But just bear in mind that your local lenders are going to be really trying to understand this themselves. So we're all going to be patient and get through this together as they're wanting to be as helpful as possible. But generally, lenders who are already SBA 7A lenders, that means they participate in the SBA programs, are going to be qualified to provide these loans. So work with your local lenders and banking institutions to try and make sure that you're working with the right lenders. We understand there's a lot of confusion, but again, these loans are going to be backed 100% by the federal government. There are very minimal requirements as far as underwriting these loans. There's no collateral required, no personal guarantee required, and a really unique feature of these loans is that the loans can convert into grants based off of what the borrower spends the money on. So here's how it's going to work. It looks at the 8 weeks of your expenses after the date of the origination of the loan, and you get to tally up everything that you spent on payroll, that you spent on rent for the business, interest on mortgages, that's all tied into the business, and what you spent on utilities. And you can get dollar for dollar forgiveness of your loan up to that amount. It's basically a grant. And so, and of course, for the forgiveness, you can't exceed the amount you actually borrowed. There are some conditions. Your loan forgiveness is reduced proportionately if you reduce the number of full-time employees that you had relative to a benchmark period, either the year before or the first 2 months of this year. So that's a benchmark they're going to look at. And the loan forgiveness is also reduced if you reduce wages by more than 25% for employees making less than $100,000. And that's a good note about the wages above $100,000. In your calculation of payroll expenses, you get to count the first $100,000 that you paid employees, but nothing beyond that. That is really targeted to help the middle income earners. Employers can also avoid a reduction in the forgiveness because we know lots of employers have had to lay people off if they bring back their employees and restore their wages, generally within 30 days of laying them off, and maintain those employees and maintain those same wages through June 30th. So think of it this way. What the government is trying to incentivize it here is they want you to give money through your small businesses to the employees by keeping them on payroll. So we often get asked, what if the business is shut down or you happen to be in an area where the governor has said essential businesses can't open? That doesn't matter for this purpose. What the loan looks at is after taking the loan, were you paying your employees? And remember, the goal of lawmakers is creating this program was to provide assistance essentially in the form of grants to help small businesses and encourage those businesses to keep their employees. So where you can learn more about this program, we have it on our U.S. Chamber website. Again, it's uschamber.com/SB loans. I know Kelly has a lot of this information and all of our guides on her website too, which I know she'll talk about at the end of this call. But we really do go into detail. We provide a lot of guidance on this program as well as some other important information. Let me also go back into the small business side of things and what's available. I'll quickly go through the SBA's Economic Injury Disaster Loans, which is the EIDL loans. And this is an important group of disaster recovery loans that have been around for a long time. If you've been affected by a hurricane or a tornado, for example, you might have applied for and received an EIDL loan through the SBA. So who's eligible? Small businesses and nonprofits, including faith-based. There are no restrictions on the types of nonprofit. It's an entity that basically is a nonprofit that has fewer than 500 employees. And again, here, sole proprietors and independent contractors can apply. However, lobbying firms and other organizations that are considered primarily in the business of lobbying or politics are prohibited. So if you spend probably more than, I think the qualifying number is about 50% more of your expenses are related to lobbying or politics, that would prohibit you from getting one of these EIDL loans. So this is actually a loan. This is not a loan that converts to a grant. You can borrow up to $2 million in working capital that's repaid over 30 years. And you see the interest rates there are 3.75% or 2.75% for nonprofits. If you take out this loan, payments are deferred for up to a year, so you don't have to immediately start paying on this loan. They made it easier for individual businesses to apply. Your loan is going to be based on your credit scores. You don't have to immediately produce tax returns. You can get up to $200,000 without a personal guarantee, and no collateral is required for $25,000 or less. Beyond that, there's general security interest, or sometimes it's secured with real estate, but they're trying to move away from real estate in this particular instance. There's an important feature that is brand new as a result of the CARES Act. If you are applying for an EIDL loan, one of these injury disaster loans, you can request that you be provided an emergency grant, which they have to provide within 3 days after your application date of up to $10,000. So again, this is an emergency grant up to 3 days, within 3 days after your application date, up to $10,000. The bill details that you can use it for a variety of different things, but there's basically you don't have to repay it even if you're denied the loan. So essentially, you request the emergency grant, you receive it. If you're denied the loan, you still don't have to pay back that emergency $10,000 grant. So you should think about this as essentially an emergency helpline for small businesses. There's some important interactions with the Paycheck Protection Program that we just talked about. Importantly, for example, if you end up with both, and generally you would end up with both because you already have an EIDL loan, and now maybe you're applying for the Paycheck Protection loan, there are going to be some rules that are around that, but you can't double forgive in this case. So there's going to be some rules around double dipping with these two types of loans. There's also some requirements with respect to the Paycheck Protection loans. Basically, if you're thinking about both at the same time, I would just talk to your lender about that and try and figure out which is most favorable for you, so that you understand which direction you should go, just so that you don't pick both and then get penalized for that. You don't apply for the EIDL loan by going to your local bank. You're going to apply for this one on the SBA website at sba.gov. And this is the one where, again, I talked about chambers and other 501c organizations are able to apply for them because they aren't lobbying organizations. And chambers can also receive the employee retention credit. So Kelly, remember that as you're going through all this. Next, I'm going to go quickly to the paid sick leave. Respect to small businesses, there are also some provisions there that we received a lot of questions about that comes out of the CARES Act, and they come from the Families First Act, which was prior to the Phase 3 bill. This is also referred to as Phase 2, so that was the Families First Act. What the Phase 2 bill did, it included what was a requirement that employees with less than 500 employees provide paid sick leave, essentially 10 days of paid sick leave to their employees if it's related to the coronavirus. Sick leave is taken when you're ill, when you're quarantined, or need to take care of a family member who is quarantined, or if you're taking care of a child because of school or daycare closures. Leave is paid basically at the regular rate, but it's for a maximum of $511 per day, unless you're taking care of a family member, and then it's at 2/3 of that rate with a maximum of $200 per day. Importantly, the federal government will reimburse the employer 100% of these costs up to the daily maximum that you pay your employees. This is a refundable tax credit, and understanding that businesses, have the liquidity problems right now, the Treasury Department is taking steps to allow businesses to request an advance on that refundable credit, so you have the resources to pay employees who are taking that sick leave. This is in addition to what the employer already provides, including what you provide pursuant to your state and local laws. There's a lot of talk about businesses with fewer than 50 employees being exempt. The law does provide that an employer may be exempt, but they can only be exempt with respect to leave that's tied to caring for a child who has daycare and it's closed, and only to the extent that if providing the leave threatens the viability of the business. So if you think this applies to you, you should check out the Department of Labor's guidelines that they're posting on their website, where they explain this a little bit more in depth. Finally, paid sick leave is generally not available for an employee where they can telework. That only applies if the employee is taking care of, for example, a child, and they can also telework by staggering and changing their hours. I know that's confusing, so make sure that you're researching this on the Department of Labor's website. And the last topic is the Family Medical Leave Act. It's a law that generally allows for 12 weeks of unpaid leave. What the Phase 2 bill did say that the employers with less than 500 employees, they are required to provide up to 10 weeks of paid family leave if the employee needs to take care of a child due to a school or child care closure caused by the coronavirus. That's the only reason for the extended leave. When you think about the interaction between this and the sick leave, an employee would take 10 days of sick leave first, and then would be eligible for up to 10 weeks of paid leave. Here, leave is paid at 2/3 the regular rate, and again, maximum of $200 per day, $10,000 in the aggregate. It's in addition to what you already provide under state and local law. Again, it's fully reimbursed in the same way by the federal government. There are similar exemptions for employers with fewer than 50 employees, same as the paid sick leave, and it doesn't apply to an employee who can telework. We just put out a guide on this particular issue on the paid leave and Family Medical Leave Act. So Kelly should have that resource probably after this webinar. She just got that from me earlier today. So I know I've covered a lot of information. I'm going to try and direct you to some great resources. Again, check out Kelly's website, the Longview Chamber website. She has all the resources that we have at the U.S. Chamber. Another great place for you all to go is not only just what's going on with the coronavirus, but there's also some great management articles that is through our Small Business Resources Co. So uschamber.com/CO is a great resource for a lot of different issues, including what we're all going through today. So again, I know I covered a lot. I'm going to turn things back to Kelly, and I'm sure we'll have some questions.
You have quite a few questions, actually. So we'll move through these, and just to let you know, if we don't get to all the questions, I will get the questions to Sara, and then I will respond to you personally to make sure that you know that we did get the question, and we want to make sure that you know that we're here. So the first one: how fast is the stimulus going to come down to Texas, and in what form? Where will the monies be funneled for distribution?
Okay, so that goes into the opportunities for these loan programs. The EIDL loan programs are available right now. You can go in and apply on the SBA website, so they're available immediately. And then the Paycheck Protection Program loans, those are, again, for small businesses. They started today. Those loan programs are now being issued through those local lenders. But again, they're going to have a little bit of a hard time getting started today. So be patient with them. You might want to check with them early next week and see if you can get in and get your application submitted. So those will be available also starting today. For sole proprietors and independent contractors, your application will begin April 10th. And then in terms of statewide resources, I know that they're working very hard to get resources at the local level. I'm not especially familiar with when Texas is getting additional resources. I know there's been provisions in the CARES Act to help at the state and local level. And maybe Kelly can share that information after this call.
Thank you. One of the questions is the county offering any grants? At this time, I'm not aware of any grants at the local or county level. I think really with what the SBA is doing, I would encourage everyone to apply for these loans and work with your local banker. I think that the senator and both Sara have communicated that very well, and that's definitely the place to start. The next question is when can I know if the application was approved? What prerequisites and additional conditions does this application have? Like, can a company apply for it if it's not currently open?
So I'm going to take a couple of those questions. Yes, you can apply for the loan if you're not open. So you would apply basically based on the information of if you were open, what would be your payroll and so forth. So if we're looking at the payroll protection program specifically, you would use the factors basically to calculate what your expenses would be if you were open. So that doesn't matter if you're closed. That doesn't make you ineligible. And then I forgot what the other part of the question was, Kelly.
How fast is the application process moving?
Oh, well, that's a tough one to answer. The SBA loans, because the EIDL program has been around for a while, you know, those programs are pretty consistent in what they've issued before. So the SBA lenders are well versed in that. It will take a couple of days for them to process it. Now, remember with the Paycheck Protection Program, those loans are through your local vendors. Those lenders, again, don't have to check various collateral. They are going to check your credit score. So they're probably going to get a little overwhelmed with applications. So again, I think it will take a couple of days to hear back, but I know everybody's working very, very quickly to try and at least get you an answer and expectations as fast as they can. But it's hard to really say. I think a lot of it is based on volume that they're receiving.
Can we apply for more than one stimulus package?
So I covered a little bit of that in my presentation. The answer is yes, but you'll need to determine, I would talk with your accountant and your lender about which program you may want to apply for, because there's going to be some double dipping caveats there that you need to make sure that if you do both, you may have, a restriction that doesn't allow you to get liquidity sooner rather than later. So I would, again, walk through these programs with your lender to make sure that based on your individual needs, are you getting the liquidity at the time that you need it? And that will help factor which of those loans you need to do and when.
Good. This question comes from an essential service industry provider for repairs. Their business is down 30% already in this first quarter since this has happened. How do they prepare and think through getting this loan?
Well, I would suggest that you take a look at this 4-page document. Again, it will be a resource that Kelly shares with you all, and it gives you a lot of information to help you prepare before you walk into your lender's office or before you talk to the SBA. Specifically, the small business guide that we have is designated to give you some guidance on the Paycheck Protection Program, because you do have to do some calculation in terms of your payroll expenses. I walked a little bit through that, but this document really gives you information. But again, you're not going to have to do any loan guarantees. You don't have to provide any collateral. So I think the most important thing is that you can walk in with specific information about what your payroll looks like, so that they can see the trend of what your payroll taxes have been and what your payroll has been over the past couple of months, so that when you walk in the door, you're well versed in to talk about what those numbers look like. But they're being fairly liberal in terms of doing these loans. So I think if you look at that 4-page document on Kelly's website, the small business guide, it will really give you a detailed step of what you need to do.
Great. As a small business, we have adequate cash to maintain payroll for a period of time, but our work has dried up and we do not have work for employees and would normally reduce hours or lay off some staff. Does our current bank balance disqualify us from a loan, even though we have a few new projects coming in?
No, not at all. Your bank balance does not disclude you, and in fact, it encourages the fact that you do need to be helped with these loans. So these are all backed by the government. They want to see businesses remain open. They want to see that you're keeping your employees, and that's the whole purpose of these loans, is to help you get through these next couple of months and hopefully back on our feet so that we can, reopen for business and have you get the work that you've had in the past. And so, no, this is exactly what the loan is designed to do, to help you through this.
Excellent. Would an employee be eligible for unemployment if they quit because they are in a high risk group and afraid versus being laid off?
Oh, no, that's a really great question. I don't know the answer to that. I know that that unemployment is eligible because you've been laid off due to COVID-19. But that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. We'll have to research the unemployment rules around the scenario that was presented. I don't know the answer.
Okay. There is conflicting information about 1099 workers. And while you're talking about 1099 workers, can you also talk about independent contractors?
Sure. So independent contractors and gig workers, sole proprietors, all of those are eligible for this Paycheck Protection Program. Again, those applications are available through your lender starting April 10th. So I would make sure that you look at that small business guide again that I've referenced. You're eligible for those loans, and you're not prohibited based on the fact that you're a sole proprietor, independent contractor, or a gig worker. So yes, take advantage of those loans while you can.
When will we see the guidelines on promised unemployment compensation provision for self-employed and independent contractors that do not apply for EIDL or PPP?
Well, I'm not sure I understand the type of employee in that situation. That may be one that we need to get a little bit more information from Kelly before we can respond to it. So why don't we circle up on that question?
Okay, that works for me, and we will definitely get back with the individuals that ask those specific questions. Sara, I want to say thank you for taking the time out of your hectic schedule to help us think through next steps and prepare for the future. One of the roles your chamber plays is to help create an economic environment that allows prosperity to occur. One of the ways we can respond quickly to your needs is by providing relevant webinars like the one today. Please be sure and visit the calendar on our website for a list of webinars coming up in the next few weeks. Together, we will be stronger, and we will come through this rocky period stronger than ever before. Again, on behalf of the chambers across East Texas, we appreciate your participation. A reminder, this webinar was recorded today, and it will be available on our website later this afternoon, and you will receive an email link from Stephanie. Be sure and share it with others. And for now, thank you and goodbye.